have another one that was one of your scripts that Len Yulee wrote, and I can't find it because I wasn't expecting this to happen.
Can you recount what just happened?
I am meeting one of my childhood heroes, Larry Houston, producer and director of X-Men the Animated Series and Fantastic Four for the Marvel Action Hour. Oh, remember it? I love that. Very underappreciated show. And I pulled out a script I have from the 3rd season of the X-Men. I asked him if he'd give me an autograph. He said, well, I didn't have anything to sign. I said, well, I've got something for you to sign. Land Savage Heart from X-Men Season 3, which he is now just reminiscing and going through, bringing back some memories.
Wow. There's a scene in this, I forgot. There's a scene in this where Storm is chasing Sauron, and they go past the building.
Yeah.
And that's me and my friend Frank Squilacci.
Yep, I remember that. I had to read about it to find. I didn't recognize it from the show, but I remember reading about that. They're like, yeah, a little cameo.
Yeah, I would throw in cameos as long as it didn't hurt the storytelling.
Right.
So that the average viewer saw it, they wouldn't think twice about it. But like that's where all the other characters came in. That if you saw Scarlet Spider, you saw a Deadpool, you're going. But I would put it in a way so that it wouldn't interfere with the story.
Of course, no. I think you guys. That's one of the things that the show did so well is the seamless integration of the concept of the Marvel Universe. I mean, when they're doing a Danger Room sequence, suddenly, they're fighting the Hulk or Sentinels or something else from another part of the mythos, and it's just, it does not feel overpowering. It feels just natural to the fabric of the Marvel U.
That was a lot of manipulation on my part because sometimes it was hard to get approvals for stuff. And so,
from whom did you have to get? Bob Harris or who would that?
The network.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of times we wouldn't call things what they were. So if they were fighting a Hulk robot, we would call it the Danger Room robot, and that's what it would be. There was an episode in Slave Island where the characters that are on Slave Island don't have the mutant power to take their powers away.
Right.
But the script it was called Mutant 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I told my art department, make this Mystique, make this Sunfire, make this the Blob, make this like Aurora and North Star. And so I had them draw those, but I kept the same name. So
1, 2, 3, 4.
So that was in the script, that was in the show, and that's how I got in there.
Brilliant.
So I would just add stuff into the show like that.
What would the network's hesitation have been? Why would they?
Licensing.
Oh, okay, interesting. Gotcha.
They didn't want to give the network, not the network, but I guess the production company more rights to characters that they hadn't negotiated. So I would just throw in cameos. So they've been in and out one scene, so it's not enough for them to claim ownership of something. It's just like a whoop, And I would, where I could, I would toss it in everywhere.
And I heard well, what I'd read was that you had started that really in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, another show.
Oh, yeah.
I consider that show to be the first adaptation of, we've got, adaptations of characters or even stories from the comics. Right. That's the first adaptation of the concept of the Marvel Universe.
Yeah. And that was also a place where that's where I got started. Rick Holberg, Rominio. That's where we actually got started and working on Marvel characters and being able to help shape the story. Sometimes help shape the stories. I mean, at that time we weren't in charge, so anything we could do on as an artist, we would try and fix stuff or slip stuff in. But that was a lot of fun.
I love that show. I loved it. You can tell it's got as many limitations as you had on X-Men.
Right.
Clearly, much more on that as far as the action and the violence that you can portray. It was, a little bit more limited, but God, I loved it. I loved the action in that. Even what you did get it's like, okay, that's bringing the comic book to life. I love it.
This is where people could hit each other.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
How do you have a comic book superhero fight when nobody can punch anybody?
Yeah.
Is that a challenge?
It was a big challenge. Because back then, it's Peggy Charon and all the rest of the groups were like saying it's too violent. We're teaching our kids how to just fight each other, and it's like the stuff that we're doing is just normal action adventure stuff. But they really came down on us a lot. And between Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, actually, the thing that actually opened the door to a lot of shows was to doing regular action shows was He-Man. He-Man opened up this door to the syndication market, where instead of being on network where you had all these restrictions, you got the syndication market where they could go into all these different stations. Peggy Charon and the rest of those guys couldn't get on our butts, and we could, once He-Man got out there, that's when G.I. Joe got out there, that's when the Transformers got out there, and almost every toy that Hasbro made got made into a toy.
Oh my God, the other key geek story about when my dad took me to New York was at one point he left me in the hotel to do a meeting, and I saw my first advertisement for the G.I. Joe cartoon in the New York market, and I went back to Minnesota, and my friends hadn't seen it yet, and I got to be the first guy to tell them about this. So we all became monster fans of that show and the toys as well. But the cartoon was a huge part of that.
Yeah, Larry learned a lot from Japanese animation. Right?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff. I mean, I learned how to do American animation from working at Filmation, but a lot of what Pete's right, a lot of the techniques I tried to incorporate in what I was doing. About that time, there's a director called Miyazaki, and he was doing a lot of these movies like
Spirited Away.
Lupin. Actually, it was Lupin in the beginning, then Nausicaa and Totoro and films like that. And he was using 2D techniques, but creating 3D effects.
Well, one really clever thing Larry told me was if you have a vehicle like a tank that's really complicated and it's coming toward you, you really only need one drawing. Because the thing gets bigger and bigger until a wheel fills the screen, and then the wheel turns, and then the thing goes away.
Wow, you remember that?
Yeah.
I did.
That was clever.
Yeah,
you wouldn't feel it was a cheat.
Right.
But it was a really clever way to get around animating a really complicated thing.
Right.
The opening of he just reminded me, the opening of the very first G.I. Joe special, where you see it opens on the ground and you see the first special. Remember the first G.I. Joe episode where you see the shadow of the jets and you pull back and it's their jets? I storyboarded that. I opened the show and I took the first 10 minutes, and I think it was Scarlet lands the jet, and it comes to the forward, and you get a big wheel, and the wheel turns and goes away from camera. I forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me. I forgot all about that. But yeah, I storyboarded the first 10 minutes of the first episode. So Will Mineo did the opening titles.
Good opening titles.
Yeah, but there was also tricks. Like I storyboarded some G.I. Joes. They would have fights, and what you saw on TV seemed very complicated.
Yes.
And they would somebody like me and him, right? We're here, and all of a sudden I grab his arm, and the next drawing he's up here, and the next drawing he's over there. Right. You get the feeling that you saw all this animation that you didn't really see.
Right. Your eye fills in what's missing. And there were a lot of animation tricks in 2D that we would just, myself and the other guys, we would just sit down and study. We would watch the films over and over again. How did he do that? And how did he get that 3D effect with foreground, mid-ground stuff and dropping and deadpanning the background? And it's like, we would just study it over and over and over again.
Well, I have another theory about why the adaptations fascinate me so much. I love the concept of seeing my Spider-Man comic that I read in panel form, actually actually moved. The part that I imagined in my mind actually visualized in reality on the screen.
Right.
And in college, a friend of mine gave me Understanding Comics to read. Right? You read that, or you're familiar with it?
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Scott McCloud.
Scott McCloud.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
He has, and I don't know that if he came up with this or if this was a theory that was pre-existing and that he just was talking about it, but there is a concept about in comic books, the concept of the space between the panels and how the reader's mind fills in that gap, and he goes on quite a bit about it, about how that it not only engages you but actually makes you partially responsible in it, because you have to create the mental image of
the transition.
Yeah, right. The point of impact, whatever it is during this act of violence or whatever. But as he was describing it, I'm reading it in his book. I'm like, oh my God! In a way, that's kind of, I think that's why it's the same thing. You said that still you're doing it in your mind, even though however many frames per second it's being shot at, there is always a little bit of a gap that you fill in yourself.
Yeah. And that's one of the big differences between a comic book and a storyboard. A comic book is a snapshot of whatever's going on, and like you're saying, your eye, as you go from here to here, your imagination's filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
Whereas when we're doing storyboards, we have to fill in we have to do the first, beginning, the end, and the middle. We have to fill it all in.
I had a big argument with somebody. I was working on a movie. Actually, I was working at Disney, at WDI, and we did a comic book for one of their things that they were promoting.
Right.
Then they hired a comic book artist, and I don't remember his name, unfortunately, because he was really good artist and younger.
Right.
But he was talking about on the storyboards, I roughed out a page, and he goes, "Oh, you crossed the line here." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh, it was 260, the line." I go, "This is a comic book page." He goes, "Whoa, it's important even in comics." And I go, "No." And he goes, "Oh, it might even be more important than in film." And I said, "Bullshit. This is a comic book page. It's a whole different animal."
Yes.
And we had a big argument about that. And I went and I brought in a Jack Kirby comic.
Right.
There was a Mr. Miracle, and two people were fighting, and one guy was shooting a thing and stuff. And from panel to panel, you jumped all over the place. It obeyed no screen direction at all. But it was the way the page was composed.
Right.
Right? Because it's panels on a page and your eye is reading it.
Right.
And it was beautiful. But it didn't have a damn thing to do with screen direction.
No, it doesn't. There are two different vehicles.
Absolutely.
That have nothing to do with each other.
Right. But
So
now,
you're right. He was wrong.
They're teaching people now about screen direction, and they're trying to apply it to comics.
Really?
Yeah. At least some.
There are some artists that I know, they are naturally cinematic, and even when they're laying out a comic book page, their style is cinematic, and they do in the way that they show stuff. It doesn't cross the line,
Right.
and so, but that's their style.
Well, Hank Tucker, remember Hank? Right?
Yeah.
Hank told me, he was a great storyboard guy, still is.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, we've all seen so many movies and watched so much television that we all know this stuff, whether we've thought about it or not. It's like understanding comics. We read and understood comics without anybody telling us how.
Right.
And so we all understand about screen direction, but we just never thought about it.
Yes.
But we've seen it forever. So naturally, we would tend to follow it.
Right. And what I've seen before, also in live action films, sometimes the director knows when to cross the line because he's doing it. If you know when to do it, as a director, it's fine.
Well, the only reason not to do it is to not confuse the audience.
Right.
If you want to confuse the audience, or if you know it doesn't matter, because there's two people having a fight and you're not going to get mixed up as to which one is which, you can break the rules if you know the rules.
And I found that, like, when you're filming real people in a scene, you know what you look like, and you know what the geography of the room looks like. I could cross the line, you won't get mixed up. But if you did it in a 2D cartoon show, you don't have all of those landmarks to tell you where you are. And so rather than confuse the audience, you try not to cross the line, because you're dealing with a cartoon and not real people.
In an animated cartoon, if you cut from a straight-on shot of Peter Parker to a straight-on shot of Flash Thompson or somebody, it's just going to pop. It's just going to look weird because it's too similar. Real people don't look that similar, so you don't get that.
You don't get that. You don't have that problem. So there was like there's 2D constraints to doing that kind of stuff as opposed to working with real people.
And Larry also taught me. He said, you know, one rule of thumb: if you get confused, if it's too much trouble, whatever the hell, just go from a wide shot to a medium shot to a close-up to a medium shot to a wide shot. Just make sure you keep it moving.
Yeah.
I remember telling my film professor about the show.
Right.
You know, because I was an ambassador for your show. I introduced dozens, I would guess over 100 people to your show.
Right.
And including, you know, a couple film professors. And I remember talking to one of them, and they mentioned like how rare it is that you would do a rack focus in a cartoon.
Right.
And I go, yeah, they just did one in like part 3 of the Phoenix Saga or whatever, where Gambit's like doing the card trick through his hands, and it like fades to the background.
And you know what else? When you do live action storyboard now, because of Photoshop,
right? Oh yes, you can do the rack focus. Yeah,
on the storyboard, you can blur. Imagine trying to draw a drawing that's blurry. You know, but with Photoshop, you can fucking put a blur on it, and it works like a charm.
My film professor was impressed. He's like, on a TV animated show, they're using that type of a technique?
That's what's so clever about what Larry and those guys were doing, because they were trying to get stuff on the screen that they could afford to do.
Right.
Budgetary. It wasn't, you know, they didn't come back to them and say, we can't animate this. It was like they knew what they were doing, and they did it so it would work.
Yeah. And
Simply.
It's simply, and there's a lot of, you have to keep it on the budget, but pulling a rack focus, as long as you didn't do anything stupid on either element, you could get that across, and nobody said no. You know, no, we can't do that. You know, because it's not that complicated, but you got to make sure there's a reason for it.
Right.
You know, if you're telling a story, the guy's got the cards, you pull the focus, and then to whatever the target or whatever it is going to be on the shot. But all of that was like, a lot of it was from the Japanese stuff and regular stuff we saw on TV.
Right.
It just kind of blended the two.
Well, Japan was so much farther ahead of us in using real cinema technique in animation, or at least the full toolbox. You know, that type of, how about a tracking shot? Right. You know, I remember that one of the first things I read that explained the difference between anime and American comics was, you know, we use speed blur lines to indicate speed, where they would track with the subject and make the background blurry to indicate the speed, and the subject would just be perfectly clear or whatever.
There's a shot that I remember I did in some Hulk show or some. Oh, yes.
Is that a shot or is that a shot? Look at that pose.
Yeah.
Been trying not to be distracted by
sorry,
that.
I don't want to interrupt, but I'm looking at you, Larry. You got to look at that shot.
She was at the check-in counter, and when I was getting my badge, and I was like, all right, don't make a scene, Jason. And I'm like, then he showed up, and I'm like, oh gosh, another. All right.
Yeah.
You gotta love the TOS, right?
Yes.
I think she exercised a little creative license in how short they were short back then, but
your eyes.
You're going out of focus.
Oh my gosh, that's too much. Well, I'm glad this is a little trip down memory lane for you.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun. So this is
well, I didn't give you a pen, did I? Here, I gotta, or if you prefer Sharpie.
No, whatever you got. Is it to just sign or to you? the sign? Or?
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. This is
San Diego Comic Fest. SD.
oh, you want to? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. I thought you were asking.
What is
What's that?
Is today the 17th? 15th? Yeah, 17th.
Yeah. Oh, today the date? Yes.
I'm
Yes.
trying to figure out the date.
I'm sorry. It is the 17th. February 17th. Okay. 17. So 2/17/17.
Okay.
Woohoo! Yeah, but if you want to make an inscription, let's do it on the inside page.
Yeah, it's gonna. That's true.
Probably should put something under it.
Sorry.
And you know, animation was a field where guys like Larry and they could make,
Lethert, Lethert.
because you could make a living as an artist in animation, which is like, there's not that many jobs in the world where you can make a living as an artist. You know? And it was, I mean, a lot better pay than comics.
Right.
And so I think a lot of comic artists, including Jack Kirby, were ultimately drawn to animation. I mean, Kirby only had medical coverage when he started to work for Ruby Spears. First time in his life, he had coverage because of the union.
Wow.
You know, he worked all those years in comics. He didn't get shit.
And slaving away too.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy.
No, he gave 100% all the time. And so it was really great when he started getting treated better.
Yeah. A lot of the, I found this out afterwards that people like Jack, people like Gil Kane,
Yeah.
when they came out to the animation studios, they really were impressed because they treated them really well.
They were all comic fans.
They were all, everybody was all comic fans. Here's Jack Kirby, it's Gil Kane, oh my God. They hired him, gave him work, they paid him every week on time. They got medical benefits for their families and stuff. You know, it's like,
Isn't that sad that you have to say, oh, they got paid on time, they got benefits? I mean, it's just such a, it's heartbreaking to hear that that's what the norm was back then.
yeah, because all of these guys are independent contractors, and so they get paid per book. And unfortunately, there's some people like Kurt Swan and somebody, when their style becomes not as popular, they get kicked to the curb. And I mean, they have nothing. They have no retirement. They got no savings. They got all of the above. But Kirby and Kane were able to join the union and basically they got paid a salary. So they got paid every week on time, deductions and a whole 9 yards. So at least that part, that helped them out quite a bit.
Plus the amount of work was so much less than drawing a whole comic book. You got Jack would draw one nice big picture. I don't know what he got paid, but it probably was as much as he got for a whole book.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot less work for a lot more money. But the work that they turned in was like phenomenal. They did a lot of work on like Thundar.
I love his designs for Thundar.
Yeah, Thundar. Him and Kane were both designing stuff on their show, along with.
I didn't know Gil Kane did too.
He did some, and so did Alex Toth. Yeah.
Yeah, Toth did the human characters.
Yep.
At least. I'm not saying that's all he did, but I know that because Kirby did almost every character on that show, but the human characters Toth did.
He came up with that guy with the heads that was swivel.
That was
The guy.
one of the.
It's like,
That's a great opening credit scene. You talk about opening credit sequence.
Right.
That's one of the great opening credit sequences for action animation, and I'll remember that shot. They use that shot in there where he turns his face and the shield opens up or whatever.
Yeah, it's like, oh. And one of them, when I was looking at it, I thought one of them might probably look like an early Dark Side or something. Yeah. Back then. The two faces he had. There's a lot so yeah, you're right. Our animation industry has really helped those guys out a lot, you know. And I was really happy to work. You know, I didn't work for them, but I got a chance to see them. They were mainly working through Rubies and Spears was the company that did Thundar. They did a lot of stuff, but Thundar is the one I remember.
Yeah.
I got a chance to do boards on that one also.
Pardon?
I got a chance to do storyboards on Thundar also.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was
I did not know that.
No, what happened with all the Ruby Spears shows, the end credits they would build them, they would pre-build them, and so if I did freelance storyboards, they didn't want to go back and add your name. So it was like, you know, okay, fine. You know, I know I did the work. I got the board.
As a kid, I noticed that the credits didn't change from episode to episode.
Nope.
Just and you're like, wait a second. There's a guest star character in this episode. It
Right.
can't be the same, all the same voices. I mean, I think it could be, but
There was part of it was money. Part of it was they're lazy. They didn't. See, that was some of the complaints for us as a creative person, but you know, a lot of that stuff is dictated by production. So you just kind of live with it.
yeah.
There's shows I worked on that I don't get upfront credit because I know I worked on it, but I got the boards and stuff.
Well, it bugged me because I wanted to know who, if it's a different writer,
Right.
because I think that's a key first step into when you really become moving from just being a movie fan to like a scholar, someone who is looking at it seriously.
Right.
Before you get to that serious stage, one of the first steps is when you start to notice that certain works by certain people happen to be better than works by other people. And you start to follow directors and
Long before I knew who Jack Kirby was, I would see challenges of the unknown, or these various comics that were so great. It's like, wow, so great. And Carl Barger, John Stanley, all these guys really good.
Oh yeah.
I mean, those with certain comics were just great, and other ones you read and forget them.
Yeah.
And it's like you find out later on, oh, it's because of these people.
Right.
Later on, you find out who they are, and you
Right.
go, oh, I see now.
But at the time, some books never had credits, and you're going,
No. That's one thing you got to give Stan Lee credit for.
Yes.
Because he would credit the inker, the letterer, the penciler, the colorist, and that was never done before.
yeah, that wasn't done at DC Comics, and it's like you'd open up the cover and going, oh, this is not who I wanted it to be, and you wouldn't know who it was. It just had a look to it. It's like you didn't know.
And so those people got their name in the credits, you might say, very literally.
Yeah.
On Mars Attacks, I thought it was going to be a good movie. I'm not crazy about the movie, it's all right, but I wanted to make sure I got a credit.
Right.
Because it's not guaranteed, So I went to Tim Burton's people and I said, am I going to get a credit on this? And they said, well, we turned your name in to Warner Brothers along with everybody else.
Right.
So I said, went to Warner Brothers and I said, am I going to get a credit on this? And they said, you'll have to talk to Norma Fuss.
What?
Norma Fuss. Okay. If there was anybody with a more perfect name, I don't think I've never heard of her. So Norma Fuss, in my mind, she's like a Gary Larson character,
Yeah.
And anyway, I called Norma Fuss and I said, hi, I'm so-and-so, am I going to get a credit in this movie? And she goes, your name was in the credits, but I took it out. Just told me, just like that.
Oh.
And I said, you took it out. And she goes, it's Warner Brothers policy not to credit storyboard artists. And that's not true. But that's what she told me. And I was like, why? And she goes, well, that's how it is. Bye.
Oh.
It's like, well, you bitch. I was so pissed off because there was no reason, and it wasn't true. They did credit. So this bullshit. So on the IMDb, if you look at Mars Attacks, my name is on it, but it says uncredited. Because I went to them and I said, hey, I worked on this movie. And they went and checked, and they go, oh, yeah, you did work on it, but you didn't get a credit. So, but I mean, there was only 3 people working on it. Why couldn't they? How much expense?
It doesn't. Yeah.
Crazy, So it's not like something that they just did a long time ago.
It's very arbitrary.
Norma Fuss. Fate is in her hands, you know.
That is too much.
I know. It's just an example of, you know, it's in the movies too. You know, and for no good reason.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
The Larry Houston panel here.
Right?
Unscheduled.
Thank you.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask. Did you, what you see, one thing I love is just as far as animation, I love all animation as a film scholar. I love, you know, all film, whatever, but also specifically passionate towards action adventure animation, which is really the redheaded stepchild of the animation family, right?
Right.
And so, to me, you know, those entries throughout history are notable, if intermittent.
Like the Fleischer Superman.
Oh, obviously. But I was curious, you know, like you were talking about like the specific comic that you bought, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay, well that actually was only a few years probably before it came out on the first 67 cartoon.
Right.
When Spider-Man also came out in 67, 66 had Marvel. Did any of those, did you see them? Did they have an impact or anything like that?
I remember watching them as a kid and going,
Grantway Lawrence?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, yeah, it was like cutouts, and you're going, the opening intro, the music was like, wow, this is great, and then you get in the show and it's like,
And there was a little bit of animation too in the opening credits.
Right.
A little bit of actual limited animation. You saw Thor doing this with his hammer. You saw a Namor jumping up and doing a dive in the ocean, and
it was American Girl is mighty. Yeah.
Now, you know what? I want to call bullshit on something. See that Thor cover with that hammer going behind it?
Yeah.
How the hell do you do that?
yeah, right.
He always draws that. It's like, you can't, how do you animate that?
I know. That's the comic book license.
On Avengers 4, right?
Right.
How does he swing that thing behind his back?
I know. That's comic
And
book
we never
license.
question it.
No,
Right?
You look at it going, yeah, it looks cool.
Right.
It's the comic book license.
May not be physics accurate.
Yes, but it looks great.
So you do remember watching Marvel superheroes as a kid?
Yeah, and I remember what I liked about it, because I was very young at the time, I liked seeing, you know, I liked seeing the comic book come to life, but I was always curious as to why things looked wonky. But the voices were nailed. They nailed the voices, and then they nailed the tone. It's just they had no money for animation.
Right. Yeah, no, those voices, they were recorded in New York, and they actually got a lot of really great young actors from the New York theater community that ended up going on to big careers. You know, John Vernon, the dean from Animal House.
Yes.
He played multiple roles, specifically Iron Man, I think he played, but he played multiple roles, and there's a few others that I'm forgetting. But yeah, great voices.
Yeah, they nailed the voices. They nailed it and all stuff. It's like, yeah, no budget.
I love the voices on the 67 Spider-Man too.
Oh, the jazzy one?
Yeah, what?
It's the one. Spider-Man?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. There were some just intense bad guy voices. I mean, like the Scorpion just had the most angriest voice I've ever heard.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but I can remember some of it. Yeah. But that was part of my childhood, watching that stuff. And I remember there was like, someone told me on one of those episodes that they ran out of money and they were producing an episode. So they cobbled together footage from all the other episodes to create one episode. And Spider-Man's traveling from point A to point B for about 15 minutes. I mean, they were reusing everything to get him from here to there.
I remember that as a kid, and I remember because I watched it in the 70s in reruns. I was born in 72, so this would have been like 76 or 78. I would have been like 4 or 6, and I remember one specific episode. And I know they use footage as a rule a lot, but yeah, there was this one where it was the one where he had to go underneath to the mole men or something that were underground, and he web swung to their underground lair for like half the episode. Oh my gosh!
You know, I didn't realize that as a kid, but I realized that as an adult going, what?
Remember Warren Greenwood?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The guy that we both knew, Warren and I did comic books together a little bit. But Warren got a job at Hanna-Barbera, working on Saturday morning cartoons, right? And so they worked all season, and everybody did their jobs and stuff, and then it was the fall, and the shows were coming on.
Right.
So he got up at the crack of dawn on Saturday morning to see the show.
Right.
Because he was so excited. He was going to get a credit. He was going to see his work on TV.
Right.
And he was like, thrilled. And he went to work on Monday, and he asked all the guys in there, hey, did you see the shows? And everyone looked at him like, are you out of your mind? You think we watched that shit? He was so crushed.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. I would watch all the shows. I mean, Saturday morning was, it was an event.
But that's the difference, Some of these guys were so bored and jaded with it that they couldn't absolutely give a shit.
Yeah. To them,
The thrill was long
gone. Yeah.
Also, though, the system promoted that because cartoons were looked at as the ghetto of the film and television industry, right? I mean, I've read several articles of, from like studio heads up to like especially network people that just looked at the children's programming as, like, oh my God, I gotta quick have a good season or two so I can get the hell out of the children's, get into daytime TV or something, They hated that or looked down on it.
They might have. I mean, people like myself. I mean, that was our dream was to do animation. But yeah, there are a lot of it. I can see a lot of executives having that opinion because Saturday morning was created when you only had 3 networks as part of the license of, okay, we're going to let you transmit your shows, but you have to commit to like 3 hours of programming for kids, educational. And that's where Saturday morning started off with like Rin Tin Tin and stuff like that. Way
live
back,
action.
the live action stuff, way back. Sky King, yeah. And then morphed into cartoons.
I will see you tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah. Bye-bye. I have no idea what I was saying.
Rin Tin Tin?
Yeah, the beginning of Saturday morning.
Oh, yeah. And because the networks were forced to create educational for kids, that's how Saturday morning was created. For the Captain Kangaroo and the rest of those things. And they needed, it started with Tom Terrific, cartoons that are like drawn with it's just black and white, with just characters and stuff, and built up from there.
Right.
Which I'm glad because it gave me something to watch on Saturday.
What'd you work on at Filmation before you went to Marvel?
There was a show that Filmation was doing for, oh God, I think it was Germany. It was a show called Sport Billy.
Sport Billy?
Yeah. And basically it was like a kid, it was 2 kids, and it was kind of loosely based on Felix the Cat because he had a magic bag, and he could open the bag and take out anything he wanted, but it was sport related. And he would go through these little simple adventures, and Filmation was doing 65 of them. And so that was my very first job, was working in sport building. And then after that, it was Flash Gordon, then Lone Ranger, and Tarzan.
Oh, I love that.
So I did those shows. And back in those days, when there were seasons. Like you work on a show, all the new shows came out in September, you get laid off in September, and then you have like 3 months off, and then they hire you back in January. So it was all seasonal. So I got laid off from Formation, and then almost not quite 3 months later, Art Patella, remember Art Patella? Art Patella called me up and said they were doing a syndicated Spider-Man, but they didn't have enough episodes to syndicate it to 65. And so I got hired to help fill out those episodes. So technically, I guess that was actually my first Marvel job. And did you work at Filmation? I don't know if you worked there.
I think I worked there after you was on.
Okay. Well, just imagine working at Filmation for almost 2 or 3 years, and then going to work on Spider-Man, and he says, there's no stock. No stock drawings, no stock books, and you're just...
Have you guys not left the same position you were in 3 hours ago?
We went away and came back.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I got the security camera footage to prove differently.
Yeah.
I'm going back to my room to continue working on the Kirby lecture that was only half put together.
All right.
I'll be up till 3 a.m.
All right.
I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the 10 o'clock call. I've been told by the boss man himself that you don't have to go to bed. You are turned off the music, and it's supposed
Is
to
it late?
encourage
It's 10 o'clock.
you to not be in this room anymore.
Talking and didn't know what
You know what? They had at Filmation. They had when I worked there. We did
So, yeah, sweet dreams in it.
Captain
We've got a
Marvel.
long weekend.
Yeah, the Shazam. Yeah. Live action or animation?
The animation, Filmation.
Filmation did the live action show too.
Oh, okay. Well, this was the cartoon. But they would flop. They changed it. But Captain Marvel has this lightning bolt thing on his chest that's asymmetrical.
Right. You can't flop it.
They did.
They did?
Yeah, and I said, they go, well, just flop it. And I said, yeah, I was in layout. And I said, yeah, but then the thing will be back. They're not on fixed, we don't care. Just, yeah, seriously.
We got deadlines here, kid.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to notice.
Right. Yeah, I can see that attitude happening.
But again, I was making a living drawing pictures, so it's fantastic. You know?
Yeah, no, I have a special affinity for Filmation because of how committed they were to the action-adventure genre. You know, they were key at the very beginning of it with Superman and Batman and Aquaman,
Right.
and then they had some key elements in the late 70s when, we had the dearth of just bad, or, there wasn't much, and what was there was not very good of action-adventure stuff, and then, I tell you, that Flash Gordon and that Tarzan, those are also big shows. Now, I was a little bit younger when those came out, but I remember when I first saw Tarzan, I thought he was kind of weird, because, the guy's almost naked, okay? Is that a little weird? Even at 6, I'm like, the guy's almost naked, or whatever. That show, he's so badass in that show. I loved it. I just fell in love with Tarzan.
There's this wonderful old guy named George Turner from Texas.
Yeah, I remember.
George Turner was a storyboard artist, but he also wrote the book about the making of King Kong, the original really nice book. And George was the editor of American Cinematographer magazine for many, many years. But we used to cover Filmation because he worked there too. He's quite a bit older than me. He's long deceased now, but he was just the greatest guy. But anyway, Tarzan, he would go, this Tarzan is bullshit. He goes, Tarzan has to kill somebody every now and then. That's like, to him, that's Tarzan. He goes, this TV Tarzan,
Yeah, Saturday morning, and we couldn't do anything.
Punch anybody.
But, we had a problem with Lone Ranger because they couldn't shoot anybody. We couldn't shoot him. Right. We'd have to. There's a bad guy over there. There's a bad guy over there, so you have to take the gun, shoot the chandelier. The chandelier would fall off camera. Then you cut to the bad guy.
I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming out for this party. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't believe I caught your name, Matt Dunford. Pete Von Sholly. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for coming out to con. Anyway, guys, see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
And by the way, get out of here. I think that's the subtext.
Yeah, that kind of is almost